Good morning, everyone. Today we've got GME training. So basically, GME is one of our strategic partners when it comes to UHF, Marine, Kingraid. Today we're just focusing on the UHF side of it and a little bit on Marine. Is that right? Yeah.
Mainly UHF, yeah.
Mainly
but if there's any
UHF,
questions
yeah.
on the other, that's fine.
So without further ado, I'll introduce John from GME. He'll be doing the training. So sit back, enjoy, and ask questions.
Thanks,
Thank
Daniel.
you. Thanks, John.
Thanks for that. Yeah. Now I know a couple of you from here and a couple from not here, so a bit of a mixed group. So yeah, thanks for joining us today. So just wanted to give a little bit of a run through of GME and the radio products. So yeah, feel free to ask anything as we go along, but I'll try and cover what I can regarding UHF radios and antennas. So I don't know how much you know about GME already, but we've been around for a long time. We're the only Australian manufacturer of UHF radios. So a fact that we're very proud of. And we have a facility in Winston Hills with 200 plus employees. So been doing it for a long time and take a lot of pride in the product that we have. So we do our R&D there, we do a lot of the manufacturing there, we have service there, so service and backup is also a strong point of having a local base. So did you guys know that was an Australian company? Because yeah, that's good. Yeah. A lot of people I speak to, even ones we've been dealing with for a long time, are like, oh, no, we didn't know that. So if you're in Winston Hills and you'd like to go and check it out, let us know, because we love to take people through the factory and show off the facility. So that is just a little overview of some of the categories that we operate in. So radios, we were talking about EPIRBs and beacons before, Kingraid of course, and commercial radio. So not all of these areas that we're covering today, but just really to give you a bit of background as to some of the spaces that GME is involved in. So there's a couple of different types of UHF radios. So we have what we call mobiles, which are the ones that are permanently installed in your vehicle. So the benefit of those is that once they're in the vehicle, you know where they are. We get asked the question sometimes, why don't I just put a handheld in the vehicle? They're not always a great solution from the point of view of restricted range, and also you've got to keep them charged and also know where they are. So if you go to use a radio and someone's borrowed it or the battery's flat, that can be problematic as well. So I'll go through in a bit more detail what some of the models are, but they're split into slightly different categories. That doesn't include the XRS there, which we will deal with as a separate thing. So we also have them as value packs where they come with antennas. You may know too that 5 watts is the maximum power allowed for domestic UHF. Sometimes you'll get questions about higher powered radios. Well, unless you're licensed to use those, they're not something that's covered under the class UHF license. So that's the reason why GME and other brand radios are 5 watts, because that's the maximum that ACMA allows for a fixed mount. And then we have the XRS radios. I guess you've probably all heard of those, and they're a very big seller for you here. So the benefits of these radios are, as you can see, all the controls are on the microphone. The speaker is in the microphone as well. So they've got the most powerful and clear speaker in their class, which is a really important thing. When you're putting a speaker into a small area like a microphone, it is a bit of a challenge to get good audio, and the GME speaker is class leading in that regard. We've got the OLED display, which the benefit of that is it's really easy to see in bright light, but it can also be dimmed down for nighttime use because you don't want it too bright in a dark vehicle situation. Now, we have Bluetooth in these radios, and you might ask the question, well, what does that do? Most of us relate Bluetooth to connecting devices to music or having a phone conversation coming through the speakers of your car. That's part of it, but what it's really about too is the Bluetooth enables you through the free app to connect the radio and take advantage of upgrades that will be released from time to time for the radio. For example, when the XRS was first released, it didn't have the voice playback feature, which is the feature where if you miss a transmission, you can press a button, you can hear that conversation again. Because of the fact we've got Bluetooth, you can connect up to the app and upgrade your radio even though it didn't have it when you bought it. So the benefit is too that whether an XRS radio is 5 years old or 5 months old, you can have the same operating system in it because of the upgrades. So that's one function of the Bluetooth. We do also have the ability to do Bluetooth output, and I'll show you an accessory that does that on the XRSs. So it means that if you want to, you can output the audio into Bluetooth devices, whether that be earbuds, headphones, or even the car audio if you want. But just bear in mind that it's a bit different to a phone call. In car audio, if you're using it for your phone, typically what will happen is you'll be listening to your music, everything's fine, the phone rings, you make your phone call, you hang up and you go back to what you were doing before. It's probably not really that appealing to have CB cutting in and out through your car speakers while you're driving along at the exclusion of anything else. So that's probably not a great application, but it does also gives you the ability to potentially put it through like wireless earbuds or something like that so that the other people in the car can't hear the conversations, particularly if the conversations are full of F words and you've got a young family driving at night and they're trying to sleep. So that's one of the benefits of that. You'll see there's a mention of location services. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to go into the app. You don't have to have an XRS radio to download the app, by the way, and have a look at the features of it. What location services does is it allows you, if you've got other people who have XRS radios as well, to all download the app and see where you are on the map in relation to each other whilst you're operating in radio range. It's full track level mapping. And what that means is if you're traveling in a remote type scenario and you're within radio range of your group, you can actually see where the others are each time they make a transmission. So you can name your radio so you can tell from the pin drops who is the person that's made the transmission, and you can control how long those pin drops stay there for or how many of them there are. So if you want them to only appear on the last transmission, you can set it up that way, for example. Otherwise you could end up with a map totally littered with pins and you can't actually see the map at all. Yeah.
With the map, he said he tells you where the drivers are.
Yeah.
Does that only work when there's a connection to the internet to the phone?
No, the good thing about it is where it says GPS XRS location services, there's two ways that this can be achieved. One is when you connect to the smartphone, it's using the GPS in the smartphone to enable the location services. So even if there's no phone reception or internet, you can still do it. The way it would work by default, if you just went out now and started doing it, you had location services turned on your phone, it would be just using data and just like it would be with any other mapping type scenario. What you can do though, if you're wanting to go to areas that you don't want to be using data or there's no phone reception, you can actually download map sets before you go to that area. So what that means is the program will still be using the GPS from the phone to put you on the map, but the map has been downloaded in advance so that it can actually show you on the map. So if you think of it like a paper map situation, so say if you downloaded the maps and then you went to an area that you hadn't planned to, so you've gone off the edge of the map, so to speak, you won't have any map data there because you haven't downloaded the maps in advance. It's a bit like if you went to a map shop and bought 3 or 4 maps and then decided to go somewhere else that wasn't on that map. It's like, oh, hang on, I don't know where I am now because I've gone off the edge of the map. So does that explain it? Yeah. One of the models, the XRS 390, has its own GPS built in, so it is actually able to operate independently of a phone if required. But yeah, that's how the app works. Yeah, for location services. So as long as you can get satellite reception, which is pretty much anywhere outside, you can still utilize that function. And as mentioned previously, Australian made. So we're very proud to use this, which is a symbol that we pay to use, being an Australian manufacturer. Not every single product of ours is made in Australia, but a lot of them are. So you'll see that on our packaging and on our units quite often when they're displayed in the store. Does the mapping side of it make sense? I just wanted to clarify too that it was for a group that was in radio communication distance of each other, because it's using the radio signal to give the location to the other users. So as long as you're all within radio range of each other, you can utilise it. You can also turn your location visibility to others on or off. So if for some reason you're like, now I want to fly under the radar, you can just turn that off and they won't see you. So this is something that is a very common question. What are the differences between the XRS models? We have 3 models of XRS. So when you look at them, particularly if you're in a vehicle and you're just looking at the microphone, you may not even be able to tell which model is fitted into the car because they are so similar. And in terms of functionality, they are very similar as well. So I'll just run through what the differences are so that you're aware. So in order of where they fit in the lineup, XRS 330C, 370C, 390C. So it's probably not clear from the illustration there, but the 330C has a smaller body, like the bit that gets hidden away is actually more compact. In today's vehicles, there's so much gear under the dashboards that even that is difficult sometimes to try and install a radio because there's so many other components under there. So our installers tell us that they like to have as small as possible a radio in some cases to be able to fit that under the dash. So when you go up to the 370C, its transceiver box, which is the bit that's hidden away, is larger. It's also metal and it has an additional speaker in it. All of them have the speaker in the microphone, but that one also has the speaker in the base of the unit. And it also includes the magnetic microphone bracket, which is really popular. I don't know whether you've seen that, but once you've used one of those, it's a bit hard to go back to the other style. So that's the difference between the first two. The 390C was introduced a little more recently, and it's probably a different application. It's IP67 ingress protection, so that is a rating that we have to manufacture to achieve to be able to accredit it with that. I guess in layman's terms, waterproof, dustproof. So the environments that this radio can be fitted into can be exposed locations. So yeah, motorbikes, quad bikes, those sorts of applications. And the whole unit, so that's the microphone, the transceiver, everything. So the whole thing can be mounted in an exposed location if required. Clearly that's not usually going to be the case in a car. So you'll probably find in the buying decision for most of your customers, it's going to come down to the first two. The other thing you'll notice is just a little note down the bottom about the packs. So sometimes that can be a deciding factor as to what the customer will select too, because they'll prefer a certain sort of pack. So I'll explain to you what those are. Was there any questions about the radios themselves? So they're the packs. So you've got the XRS 330. So the top two packs are the 330 variants. So the touring pack comes with this style of antenna, so it's a flexible whip with the base loading and spring. The other pack is the Outback pack. It's not this actual antenna, but it's the same sort of style of antenna as this, where it's got the solid radome. So the radome, as you may be aware, is the fiberglass part of the antenna. And then the 370 comes with that actual antenna, the fatter version of it. So the reason I say that sometimes the decision will come down to the pack configuration, what we find is this is by far our most popular antenna, and a lot of it seems to have to do with the appearance of it. So even though we have other antennas that will perform equally well and are less expensive, this is a bit like fitting a set of wide black wheels on your car. It's like, no, I want that one. So we find that that can be the deciding factor. And also the magnetic mic bracket. People love that too, and quite rightly. It's a great feature. So they're the three bundles that we offer at the moment. So they come boxed in, a walk away ready package. So the only thing that you really need to add is somewhere to mount the antenna. So with these antennas, and look, this is an even larger one, there's quite a bit of weight in that. So clearly it needs to be mounted on a solid surface. In a lot of cases that will be a bull bar or other suitable strong bracket. So the only thing that's not in the pack is the bracket, but all the wiring and other items that are required are in these bundles. This was a newer addition to our range. So this is the XRS handheld. So it has pretty much all the features of the XRS 390, but in a handheld. So by that, it has the GPS features built in. It's IP67. It also has the Bluetooth audio built in. It's got a lot of gear built into it. It's got a color screen, which is easy to read in sunlight. And it's military tough. So it's a really top end handheld unit. 5 watts, which is the legal maximum. And that's an Australian made radio as well. So Daniel, I think you've got those in stock at the moment? Yep. So they came out earlier in the year, so they've been a really great addition to the range for somebody who may not want to mount one in the vehicle permanently or has one in the vehicle but needs additional communications.
What sort of battery life would you get out of that, before having to change or recharge?
Yeah, good question. The battery life you can vary in a number of ways. So it comes 5 watts, but you can switch it down to either 1 watt or even 0.1 of a watt. So depending on your usage, how much you're transmitting, how much you're receiving, and what power setting you've got it on, you can get up to around the sort of 40-hour mark if you put it on a battery saving type mode. Certainly with most usage, we'd just recommend charging it at the end of the day. But you can stretch it right out. If you're in close proximity and you can get away with using the lower power settings, then you can stretch the battery life right out.
Can you turn the GPS on?
Yeah. Things like that. When you look in the manual, it will actually run through different settings that you can potentially increase your battery life on. And the GPS is certainly one of the settings. You can also select your own, a bit like you can with your phones, backlight timeout and various things like that too. So that if you really want to try and maximise your capabilities, you can really stretch it out.
Can you charge it from a portable power bank? Like on a radio part cell one.
Yeah.
Like an IP rated one that you clip on your belt, which we find a great advantage because you charge so many things from a USB connection to.
Yeah, they don't currently charge through USB. So the two charging methods are 240 volt connection or cigarette lighter charger. So it's probably not ideal for that sort of application. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Any questions? Further questions about the handheld? Yeah. We can come back to it later if need be. But we're very proud of that new model. We do have other handhelds, but I'll cover them down the track. We're just going through the XRS ones at the moment, so that's why that's in this section here. Now, when I was talking about Bluetooth before, in the XRS 660, the Bluetooth's built into it, which is awesome. With the other models, the fixed mount models, the Bluetooth is not built into the radio in terms of audio output. Okay, so the fixed mount XRSs can do Bluetooth for upgrading the radio and also the location services that we discussed before. If you want audio output, this is the device that you would buy. So it's an accessory that can be retrofitted to any in-vehicle XRS model. So it does a couple of things. One is it's got this steering wheel mounted wireless push-to-talk button. You don't have to put it in that clamp if you don't want to. It's basically a round push-to-talk that you can locate anywhere in the vehicle that you find convenient. It also has, that's a pillar microphone, so that microphone typically would be located somewhere near your mouth. So what happens is when you're driving along, you press the button and just talk normally and let go of it, and that'll be your transmission. You don't have to pick up the microphone. So the box itself hides away underneath the dash like the radio. So what that means is then you've got the ability to do the Bluetooth audio output to the earbuds or the car audio or wherever else you might want to output it to.
So where does it connect? Just to the...
Yeah. Well, I think the next one actually gives you the connection. I'll shoot through to that and show you. That's going to be the easiest way. So yeah, essentially what happens here. So normally, here's your transceiver box that would be mounted out of sight under the dash. So there's your BT device there. So it goes in line. So normally what will happen is your microphone will plug into the front of the radio, or some people have a pass-through, you know, where there's like an extension microphone cable, either way. So you plug this device directly into the radio, then you plug the microphone in the other end, or the pass-through cable, and it just sits out of sight there. That's why you might have seen a couple of lugs on it. So they're designed so you can cable tie it up under the dash, so it's secure. And then you just pair it, and that's your connection. The little microphone actually plugs in here. So there's a round socket there. You plug that microphone in and run that up your pillar, or have it somewhere on the dash so that when you're speaking, it can pick up your voice. It's always a good idea too, in the menu settings, you can adjust the gain for the microphones separately. So you can adjust that microphone and that microphone separately. What we found is if you adjust the gain up a bit for the BT microphone, you get a more equal listening experience to people at the other end. So you can play around with that at any time, but that's just something worth knowing as well. Yeah, so does that make sense how that all goes together? Yeah, so it's pretty quick to do. It's really just a matter of plugging it in, doing the upgrade, because you need to do the upgrade on the Bluetooth app just to make sure that your radio recognises the device, and then off you go. And yeah, you can either mount it on the steering wheel like that, or mount the PTT button separately somewhere else. Okay, antennas. Probably we get more questions about the antennas than the radios, to be fair, because there are so many types. That's why we did the bundles, the packages, because, okay, there are only 3 packs. They're not going to suit everyone, but they're a good starting point. So some customers say, okay, well, look, if the manufacturers put that antenna in a box with that radio, then I'm assuming that it works with it. So yes, give me that. And that's true, as long as it's the right one for your application. So the reason we have the different styles of antennas, you know, when I mentioned radomes before, so these are a solid fiberglass radome. So you've got a heavy spring, you've got an antenna that doesn't bend. The spring does all the bending if it's needed. With these type of antennas, they do have a spring, but the whip itself is also flexible. Now that's fine. However, if you're operating in really rough corrugated road conditions, you're better off not having that, because even though these are solid antennas and they're well manufactured, what you tend to do is you'll get an action going on like that, and the antennas can fatigue at that point, and that then becomes a problem. Last thing you want is an antenna breaking off and rolling across your bonnet and possibly damaging the car, and then you don't have comms either, so that's twice as bad. Stainless steel antennas are even worse in that sort of scenario. That's for severe off-road conditions. If you're towing a caravan around on normal roads, then stainless steel or these types of antennas are perfectly fine, which is why we call that the touring pack, because it's designed to be for touring, as opposed to the Outback pack, which uses a solid radome antenna, so that you're not going to have those sort of situations. The antenna that's closest to me here, that's an on-glass antenna. We've got 3 versions of those. So these ones are a clear tape, so they're installed on the inside of the window. That's a low gain one. We do a high gain one as well, and we also do one with an external whip. So there are 3 different types of the on-glass antennas. The question there, of course, is always going to be range. How far am I going to get with an antenna? Antenna range is a bit like talking about fuel consumption in your car. It varies a lot with different conditions. What I would say though is if you're setting up a vehicle for remote locations and the comms could be critical in terms of you are going to need to get as far as possible, you would not choose an on-glass antenna, you would choose a fixed antenna, and properly installed, that will give you your longest range. The on-glass antennas are great for touring. If you just want to be able to tell the semi-trailer behind you it's okay to pass, or you want to hear what's going on down the road, the on-glass antennas work really well and they're fine. So it's really a question of application. I mentioned gain. Is gain a concept familiar to you? Yeah, okay. What we've started doing, which I'm really pleased to see, is putting it on the antenna packaging. So yeah, so up the top there, we've got pretty much a replication of what's on the screen there, which is the antenna gain pattern. So when we're talking to a buyer who is totally unfamiliar with gain, and they're presented with some numbers, it's like, oh, okay, well, I'll take the biggest one. That's got to be the best because it's the biggest number. It ain't necessarily so. So gain is really for different terrains. So what we've tried to illustrate with that diagram there is, if you look at the lower gain, it's more like the 3 dBi versus, say, the 6 dBi. The lower figure sends out the signal in a more rounded fashion. So what we're talking about here is we've got an antenna that's still putting out power from a 5-watt radio, so it's using the same amount of power, but it's actually distributing the signal in a different way. So it's not as if one antenna is more or less powerful than the other, it's just the way it's sending its power out. You know, if I come into your store and say, I want to buy a torch or a work light, you might say, okay, what are you going to be using it for? Oh, I'm going to be using it for working on vehicles at the side of the road, you know, changing wheels or something like that. Okay, well, you want something you can put down on the ground. It's got a nice spread out beam, so you can, when things fall off and roll away, you can say, oh, there it is, I can still see it. Somebody who's a security guard might want a pencil beam torch because they hear a noise down the back of the store and they want to be able to go like that and shoot their beam a long way into a specific spot and see what is in that corner. So that's a bit the way this works. So that the high gain will be far more directional and the low gain will be more tolerant to undulating terrain. So what that means is the high gains will go further in flat country, but if you're in the high country and hilly country, they're not going to be as good because they're a bit too directional for that sort of work. Yeah. Does that make sense looking at that diagram as well? Sometimes I find the light description can be something that people can understand a bit better than radio signal, but I think the diagram spells it out pretty well. So the question then becomes, all right, which gain is for me? Well, you can change them by changing the width of the antenna, and we do have, for example, in this case, this is a twin pack. So this one has a 2.1 and a 6.6 in the same packet. So by changing the antenna top over, you can go from one gain to another.
Do you ever have people ask to put both at the same time?
As in having them two antennas fitted? Yeah, that does come up. With UHF radio, you can only run one antenna at a time in terms of, you know, having that connected to the radio. There are switches available that you can switch from one to the other. Whenever you put anything in line, there's always the question about loss. You know, are you losing or compromising signal by doing so? Your best case scenario, if possible, is to actually have one antenna base and lead and swap the whip over to get the gain that you want. But yeah, there are systems available where you can fit the two antennas, like a low gain and high gain, and then physically switch a switch to go from one to the other. So it is possible.
And they have to be far apart from each other as far as possible? Or?
Yeah, look, with antennas, it's always preferable to have them not directly next to another antenna or anything else that's vertical, you know, like say a ladder rack support or something like that you get on some tradie vehicles. So yeah, if the antennas can be ideally on one on each side of the vehicle would be preferable, but not right next to each other, yeah. Okay, we talked about the XRS portable before. So these this is just a snapshot of the other ones that are available. There might be situations where you don't need a tough as nails, waterproof 5-watt handheld, so there are alternatives available. We try and keep it simple by not having too many. So we've got 1 watt, 2 watt, and then we go into the 5 watts. We're talking about charging before. The 1 and 2 watts are USB chargeable. The others are chargeable, as we discussed, with cigarette lighter or 240 volt connections. 1 and 2 watts are probably more suited for reversing caravans in, or very short range work, and they also don't have an IP rating, so that's something to consider. Probably the other thing, when you're looking at the difference between the 1 and the 2, you'll notice that all these radios have a dedicated volume control knob on the top, which is usually far more convenient to use when you're out in the field. The 1 watt has up and down multi-function buttons that include the volume that are not as intuitive, so take that into account too when you're making a choice. Some of them are available in twin packs and even quad packs in the case of the 2 watt. Phone antennas. So has everyone heard of a Cellfire Go? Yeah. So essentially what that type of product does is it gets fitted into a car and gets connected to an external phone antenna, and it just means that anyone who's within that proximity in the vehicle will get the benefit of the antenna being external rather than the phone just using its own antenna. That's simply what it does. So it means you've got the opportunity to get signal in areas where you may not necessarily get sufficient signal with just the handheld device. It doesn't mean you're going to get signal where there is no signal, but it can improve your signal in fringe areas. That's the purpose of what these things do. So our phone antennas will connect directly to that device. They've got the correct termination on them for that. The configurations that we have are essentially these two. So the A4704 and 4705 style. And the great thing about them as well is that the internal base is actually different to the UHF. So if you've got 2 of the antennas on your car, a UHF and one of these, and you have to take them off for a car wash or car park or something, you can't put them back on the wrong base because they won't fit. So that's a deliberate design feature. But externally they look the same because people like matchy-matchy, so that's why we came up with it. Yeah. They've just been updated too for the new frequencies. Yeah. And PLBs. So yeah, we highly recommend these for people working in remote locations, particularly lone workers. Essentially what happens with this is if you get into a life-threatening situation, you can set this device off and leave it and assistance will come. Now, the way they work is they're GPS enabled, so the location accuracy would be about the size of the showroom that we're sitting in at the moment. They also, you can register them, which we strongly recommend. So what happens is if a signal is detected, AMSA will try and contact people on the list that you've nominated to try and get some more details of what you may have been doing at the time that this got activated. That may help them narrow down whether you're on foot, whether you're in a vehicle, what you were doing at the time, so that they may know what appropriate help to send out. In some cases, there may have also been some preliminary communications. A friend of mine was in a situation where he was able to send some SMSs out on the water, but then the boat was drifting out of range, and so the AMSA was able to ascertain that the motor wasn't working. It was a beautiful, calm day. It was the middle of the day. There was no one hurt. Basically, they were just stuck out in the middle of nowhere and needed someone to probably tow them back in. So the advantage of that was that they were able to deploy the appropriate resources rather than sending a helicopter out straight away in case someone had cut their leg off or was in a really bad way. So yeah, the downside is there's no two-way communication, but the upside is there's a 7-year battery life, and if you need help, you can set it off and you don't have to do anything else. So there's pros and cons for both scenarios. Obviously, the messaging side of things definitely has its place, but we have to be aware that the more features we add to these things, the more toll it takes on the battery life, and also in some cases, the more complicated it makes to operate. The advantage of these is they're designed to be very simple to deploy. and once they're deployed, they're done. So if you had like a snake bite situation, for example, and there was a risk of unconsciousness, then once the unit's deployed, they know where you are, they know where to come to. So we are looking at other devices down the track, but at the moment, that's what we're operating with. Yeah. And we make those in our factory too, and export them. Yeah. So you'd normally have those here too, I think, Daniel. Yeah. 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 So we were just discussing earlier about what the difference between one of these and a boat EPIRB is. A boat EPIRB actually does the same thing, but it has to be able to meet certain requirements such as floating and being able to transmit in that floating position, and also being able to transmit for a certain period of time. Whereas the PLB doesn't necessarily have to be able to do that, but it will still, if you had one of those and you're on a boat out in the middle of nowhere, it will still do the same thing. It's just that it's not compliant from a safety perspective. So if the water police pulled you over and said, "Where's your EPIRB?" and you showed them that, they're like, "No, that's not an EPIRB, mate. Show us the EPIRB." So a good practice is for crew to have these and the boat to have an EPIRB. So what it means is if you've got one of these on your belt and you fall off the boat, then you can set that off independently of the boat's EPIRB. So yeah, that's our PLB. So, sorry, no, you're right.
Can that only be used in Australia or what?
No, actually, I'm glad you asked, because they can be used anywhere. So AMSA is the authority that monitors them for us in Australia and some other South Pacific areas. But yeah, you can use this anywhere in the world. And essentially what will happen is, because it's registered in Australia, it'll go back to AMSA, but then they will make contact with the relevant authorities in the area that it's been detected. Yeah. So yeah, it's pretty handy device.
What? Sorry, another question.
No, please do. Yeah.
What's the deal with the battery when it's being used?
Yeah. Okay. So what happens with that? So yeah, as it says there, there's a 7-year battery life. So if you own one, there's a testing recommendation. Don't over-test it either, because every time you test it, it uses some battery. So there is a recommendation in the manual of what to do, you know, on a frequent basis to check that it's operating okay. When you get to the end of your 7 years, you've got a couple of choices. One is you can get it refurbed. The other is that you would buy a new device. Now, labour costs keep going up, so what the cost of refurb is going to be in 7 years' time, we don't know. When you get a refurb, there's a 12-month warranty on your refurb. When you buy a new one, you get the applicable warranty, plus it's a brand new device. So with changing technology too, if you consider at the moment a refurb's probably in the neighbourhood of $230, you might think that in 7 years' time, you would possibly be looking to upgrade, you know, to a new device. But you've got those two options essentially. Yeah, and they come back to us for refurb, so it's not just something we let anyone do. They've got to be done by us so that we can make sure that they test properly when they've been put back together.
And if they actually use it in an emergency,
Yeah. What actually happens there, if you activate it, if it's a legitimate activation during the 7 years, we will actually give you another one. Yeah, because even if you've set it off for a few minutes, as in a proper activation, yeah, we don't want you putting that back in your gear, because it may not have sufficient battery if it needs to be used again. So what would happen is, if you do activate it, contact us and we'll organise to replace it.
Any proof required that it's done properly though?
Well, AMSA will provide that proof. Yeah, because what happens is any activation is monitored by AMSA, and they send us a report as to what's happened. You know, so if they say, oh, you know, Tony ran out of pizza, so he set it off, you know, one day on Sydney Harbour, yeah, that won't qualify. But yeah, if it's a legitimate activation, yeah. Yeah, and look, I know it's a good question to ask, what is a legitimate activation, but you know, if it's deemed to be a life-threatening scenario, so if you're in if you're in a remote situation and you're thinking, well, hang on, I'm in a bit of trouble here, I don't know when someone's going to come past, and then someone comes past 10 minutes later, well, okay, you weren't to know, so I don't think you're going to get pinged for that sort of thing. You know, it's a bit of a judgment call, but if you really think you're in a life-threatening situation and that's your explanation, then yeah, that's what you would do. Yeah, Yeah. And if it's legitimate, there's no cost to the operator. That's something that's government funded. Yeah. So look, they're a great system. So we just wanted to give you a bit of a run through on that as well. Yeah. Yeah. They were the points that I am here to cover today. Have you got any questions about any of our other products, or obviously any of the things that we've talked about already?
The TX6165.
What's that? Yeah. Oh, we have to censor now. Yeah.
Well, we know that TX6160 has run to its end. Do we know roughly when the new radios are coming?
You'll hear something next week. Yep. Yeah. Daniel's aware of the situation too. Yeah. So, yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Just make one.
You
talked before about the glass-mounted antennas.
Yes.
I've heard a couple of horror stories regarding the coatings that go on some window glass.
Okay. Yeah.
Particularly if the dealer has a third-party supplier.
Okay. Yeah.
And some of them, particularly tinted ones, but other coatings can attenuate the radio. People had no end of trouble just with their normal radio, but because of this mix-up and dealers not being aware of that situation. I just wondered whether anyone here had encountered that.
Well, if anyone has,
is that something you warn about, or is that just
we do. Yeah. No, not at all. It's something that is mentioned in the installation guides, and it's a legitimate consideration, because what you're probably referring to is when these coatings have some sort of metallic finish in them.
Right.
So essentially they're blocking the signal.
Car dealers they get better value. They'll have some third-party supplier, and they'll do a big sell to and then the poor old user ends up with the problem. They've got no idea why.
Yeah.
And, they go back to you because your antenna's lousy, and you go round and round and round until someone who really knows their stuff says, well, this wasn't supplied by the Toyota or whoever.
Yeah.
It was from Joe Blogg's,
Yeah, so essentially what
and that's been the problem.
Yeah, because the antenna needs clear glass, as in, it doesn't matter if it's tinted glass, as long as it's not metallically tinted glass, to actually be able to transmit in all directions. So in that sort of scenario, there is another antenna that can be used, which is an on-glass antenna, which has an external whip and an internal box and an external box that the whip comes off. But the tint would have to be trimmed in between those two boxes which is, in practice, what would happen, it's a fairly simple process, particularly if everything's being installed at the same time. Typically what they would do is install it in, say it's a wagon, in one of the rear load area windows, and what they do is they cut a small square where the box is stuck to, so you don't see it anyway, unless the antenna ever gets removed, and then that way the signal's got a clear path to go through. But the other way to avoid it, if possible, is to put it on the front windscreen, because in most cars, not all, but in most cars, there's nothing like that on the front windscreen. And the aftermarket tints are the things to be aware of. Yeah. So, you need to be aware of those and avoid them. Other things that are okay though, demister wires are all right, but not other antennas. So if a vehicle's already got an AM/FM antenna built into the glass, don't put it over that, but it is okay to put it over normal demister wires. There's no issue with doing that. Yeah. And also make sure the windscreen is not freezing cold. When you put it on, the best way to put them on is on a warmer windscreen, and put it on like a transfer. Use soapy water, peel the backing off and use a squeegee, and it gives you a little bit of wriggle room too to be able to move it, align it. And they do need to be mounted in a horizontal plane. So as you see there, so they don't get mounted that way. They either get mounted from the bottom of the windscreen or from the top. Yeah, because that's the radiating pattern is designed to operate that way. Yeah.
Well, in most cases, it'd be an inclined screen.
Oh no, I just meant you can't put it across the top or the bottom of the screen. Yeah. Yep. But sometimes we do hear these stories and try and pass that information on accordingly. Yeah. Anything else? If that's all, I'll leave you to it, and thank you for coming along. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Yeah.